Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Elana Levin, aka Elana Brooklyn. This is a podcast for people who wonder if the Doom Patrol will be the superhero team to take on the climate apocalypse, or if their powers are limited to defeating really weird rain, like when it rains fish or refrigerators. That's right, we're talking about Doom Patrol, the new TV series based on a cult classic comic series made famous by folks like Grant Morrison, Rachel Pollack, Gerard Way, and Nick Darrington. The series is exclusively available on DC Entertainment's streaming platform, DC Universe. And oh god, does this mean you need to sign up for another service? Well, answering that is one of the reasons we're taping this episode so early in the season, to help you decide if you want to subscribe in the first place. Is it worth the $8 a month? Plus, which does also give you access to a big archive of DC content, including the comics like Doom Patrol, that I know I've been enjoying a great deal. But is it worth a subscription? My guest and I are here to help you decide if you want to watch Doom Patrol, and to dig deep into the meaning of the TV series, and maybe reflect on the comics that inspired it. We've just finished watching episode 2, and the first part of this podcast will be spoiler-free. I'll announce when the spoiler time begins. So I'm extremely excited to bring on 2 new guests for this show. John Arminio is a dedicated comic book nerd, cinephile, and metalhead, frequently a guest on the Wrong Reel podcast. He pursues his geeky passions by working at Comics Connection in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, where he fights against entropy by selling physical comics and books in 2019. You can find him making dumb jokes and saying nice things about comics, movies, and podcasts at Quasar Sniffer on Twitter and Instagram. And John and I actually met while delivering lectures on shock rock at Kevin Geeks Out. Hello, John.
Oh, that was great. It's great to be here, Lana. Thank you.
What was that?
I said it was great, the Kevin Geeks Out show.
It was, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Also joining me is my first comics friend. No joke, going way back to high school. Seriously, before we met, I was strictly reading Marvel Comics and Sandman. Mark has truly broadened my comics horizons. Mark was the Virgil to my Dante in comics hell, and that is Mark Argent. Mark is a most singular they, living in Baltimore, Maryland, with a housemate and 2 cats, and posting primarily about comics, tabletop games, gender, left-leaning politics, the communities surrounding those things, and other things that alternate between bringing them great joy and deep disappointment, at Mark_Argent. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Alana. It is great to be here. I'm so sorry for having pulled you into comics hell like this, but I'm really proud of what you've done with it. So,
thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm flattered because I basically do nothing. So.
No, that's good. I actually enjoyed your insights and conversation we were having around a number of series. So, for our listeners, who are the Doom Patrol, the world's strangest heroes? As a team of misfit heroes, hated and feared by those they protected, led by a genius who uses a wheelchair. And did I just describe the X-Men? Well, I did, but this is also a perfect description of Doom Patrol. The 2 series were released within months of each other in 1963. Must have been something in the nuclear age water. That was writers Arnold Drake and Bob Haney, and artist Bruno Premiani, who created the initial series. And now it's time to dig into the good stuff. So how are each of you enjoying the show? John, what are you thinking?
I like the show. I was kind of expecting a very sort of kind of crass, R-rated, kind of gleefully profane kind of exploitation of these characters and their faults and their kind of sexual proclivities, which I think the opening scenes with Robot Man kind of indulge in, but I was pleasantly surprised that it seems to take the characters seriously and give them moments of pathos. So that very much impressed me. It's a little cheesy and over the top, but I also love Timothy Dalton and Alan Tudyk's performances. They're outstanding. And we finally get a cyborg we can root for, so that's cool.
This is true. Tim who? Oh, Timothy Dalton. Yeah, totally. Mark, what do you think about the show so far?
Okay, well, I am coming at it. I'm going to present the other side of it, which is, I think, I think the show is... so I enjoyed the show, but that does not mean it is a good show. I think it's a mess. I think the cast is far too good for what they've been given. They're doing a great job with some very ham-handed scripts that are inconsistent in terms of both tone and continuity, and that makes it fun to watch, but by no means is it good. I believe the show evinces multiple rewrites, revisions, and even total re-envisionings within the course of a single episode, and I think it boils down to having two conflicting creative mandates: make the hot, sexy, sharp, cool, weird version that people actually enjoyed, versus make the Silver Age version that can be scaled up and down the demographic ladder for marketing purposes. So, like, you have the you have these characters from the 1990s Grant Morrison version. You have the villain Mr. Nobody of the Brotherhood of Dada, and you have Crazy Jane, she of 64 different personalities, each with a separate power set. And then you have the Silver Age characters. You have Robot Man, Negative Man, Larry Traynor, and Elastigirl, Rita Farr. And none of these are bad characters, and none of them are bad portrayals of these characters, but it feels like a mismatch in a bunch of places. And it feels like some of it was kind of mandated, like it's got to have Crazy Jane and Mr. Nobody, but you can't have Rebus, the magical intersex person, because that's way too gay, but you can make Larry gay because a gay test pilot is still manly, and oh yeah, it has to have a Teen Titan in it because the Doom Patrol has a Teen Titan in it. It's got to be weird and surreal, but not too literary or artsy, so replace the reference to anything that might require a trip to Wikipedia with Deadpool-esque fourth wall breaking and CGI donkey fart skywriting. And here we come back to the whole crassness thing. Because crass is fine. The surrealists could be crass. Duchamp put a urinal in the museum, but this is over-the-top Garth Ennis crass. And it feels out of place. And there are heavy themes in Doom Patrol, especially in terms of mental illness and gender and sexuality. And from what I've seen so far, I don't feel like this team can handle it. So that's where I am on this. It's a fun, light little show, and it's not good enough.
And you were saying that you felt like people who enjoyed this should actually just be reading the comics.
Yeah, like if you start watching this show and you fall in love with these characters, if you fall in love with Crazy Jane, and geez, Diane Guerrero as Crazy Jane is really easy to fall in love with. Yeah, just ditch the show and go to the comics. You've already got the DC Universe subscription. Just switch tabs to the comics tab and start reading.
So for me, I came at this series having read the beginning of the Gerard Way Nick Darrington comics run, which I enjoyed a lot, but I have enjoyed more upon second reading after I read I read like the beginning of the Grant Morrison run. I have not read the whole thing, but I've read the beginning of it. I have enjoyed the show more in light of my familiarity with the characters, although I don't think it's required.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. For me, though, like, it's all been very good to experience it contemporaneously and complementarily. So I think, like, watching the show while reading the material could be the way to go for new folks. I like the show, but and I really like the show, actually. I could totally see myself eventually having my heart broken for it because of the things that it does have to do delicately that Mark pointed to. Like, there is a ton of really heavy thinking about gender and disability and bodies in particular that it would be very easy for the show to fuck up. And to me, so far, it hasn't done that yet, but it certainly could. And I'm sitting here being like, gee, I really hope this doesn't fuck up, because I don't feel like it has so far. It totally could, but it hasn't. So far for me, I've really loved it. So I'm on team, like, this could be really good, guys. Hold on to your hats, maybe, but you know, it's still a DC TV, and they could do all kinds of things still that would be bad at this point. So
just on the most, I don't want to hog too much time here, but just on the most basic level, like, I feel like they're leaning really heavily into the portrayal of mentally ill people as belligerent, with how Crazy Jane just keeps being the source of conflict. The source of conflict between the characters. She keeps screwing things up for everybody, and I don't like that. I don't like, because that is the fallback position for portrayals of mentally ill characters. It's this is the screw up. This is the person who walks into the minefield, who dives into the bottomless cosmic hole generated by a donkey fart.
Well, but I think that Jane also like what you're seeing is true. Mm-hmm. But Crazy Jane also acts as a catalyst and a speaker of truth. Mm-hmm. So the story wouldn't exist without her shaking up. Which is another trope.
Which is another mentally ill and mental illness trope. I mean, but you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, I guess.
I mean, it wouldn't be good for her to just sort of be like this passive victim, and she's not that.
No, absolutely
and she is the person who makes people question what is happening to them.
Yeah.
And like they needed that because
that the big three are pretty passive.
Yes, they are. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I would say that for me, the big draws of the show thus far are the performances, which are to a person excellent. The art direction, which is actually what hooked me in the first place. When I saw that first clip of the Doom Patrol's appearance on the Titans show, I was like, oh, this looks gorgeous. Maybe I need to check this out. The art direction really is very well thought out, top notch. Everything from the color tones of the different flashbacks versus the different characters and scenes is very well thought out. The cinematography is very strong. And then, as later has been revealed, the music has been spot on and is used. I am really sensitive about like who deserves to use what song for what purpose, because I have such strong feelings about a lot of the music. And the fact that the show pulled off, and we'll go into why once we get to the spoiler section. The fact that the show pulled off using a Bowie song off of Black Star soon after his death, to me speaks to the intelligence of the show. Just say, I don't think any of us have been watching Titans, right?
I watched I tried to watch the Doom Patrol episode in full.
Yeah, I did watch that episode, yes.
Yeah, and ended up fast forwarding through most of the Titans parts because it really is kind of abysmal. Let's for the complaints I have about Doom Patrol, it's Oscar quality compared to Titans, and that really does rely on the performances. There's nothing to complain about there for me.
Yeah, I don't hate the Titan show, but I think of it the same way I think of it as Green Arrow. Like, oh, it's just not for me. Like it. Yeah. But the cast in Doom Patrol is, to a person, far better than anybody in Titans. So and Mark, all of your criticisms of Doom Patrol I agree with. Mm-hmm. It just didn't make me want to angrily turn it off.
Oh, sure, it didn't make me want to angrily turn it off either, because, like I said, I enjoyed watching the show, and I'm a particular bitch. Like, let's not. I don't want to fuck around with that. I am extremely particular about television. So
the threshold for you to decide a show is worth very high.
Yeah. So I feel I should have presented that much earlier, that I can be
no problem.
That I can be a really particular bitch about television.
Before we get to spoilers, I want to say one last thing, which is that watching I've been watching Young Justice Outsiders during DC Unlimited, which has also very much validated my subscription to DC Unlimited, or DC Universe, whatever the hell they're calling it. The Doom Patrol related episode of Young Justice Season 3 is wonderful and hilarious, and I highly recommend folks watching that. if you are enjoying this show and haven't watched Young Justice, you could actually just watch that episode and still get a kick out of it.
Yes.
So with that in mind, we're shifting.
Well, actually, I do have
Sorry. Mm-hmm.
I do have one thing. What has been your experience with this service in general? Because when I try to watch anything, and I've tried to watch Young Justice, Batman the Animated Series, because I wanted something for the back catalog, and also Doom Patrol, and I'm using this on a laptop, not a big screen, and it's the same device that I use Netflix and Amazon streaming on, it buffered at once a minute.
Yes.
It's just infuriating to use. So I don't know if either of you had that experience, or if my geographic location makes that the case, but like if you're just buying this app for the streaming content, it is not worth it for that reason.
I watched it. So I actually watched both episodes of this twice. I watched in bed on my iPad, and it was pretty smooth. I didn't have the buffering problems that you referred to, but I tried streaming it out from that iPad to my first gen Chromecast on the big screen, and it does not like it when you switch to other apps, like say your text editor when you're trying to take notes for a podcast that you're going to do about the show that you're watching. So that caused some problems. Had to restart the app a couple few more times. And by all reports from what I've read, the website is a freaking nightmare. Like for streaming purposes, it's kind of a highly variable experience.
I had the same problem. I had the same problems as Mark. I would just say that I have found it less irritating to use than the Marvel Unlimited. but yeah, I had problems watching the streaming video content on my TV, and less of a problem watching it on my laptop. So I'm curious to see how tech support is, because my big beef with Marvel Unlimited was that there was no tech support. So I'm curious to see if how the tech support is for this.
I did email them about a problem I was having that turned out to exist between user and device. It wasn't their problem, but they were pretty responsive. They got back to me pretty quickly.
Sorry. Okay, everybody, let's get started with the spoiler section.
Spoilers.
Okay, spoilers. So I broke this down sort of into a few sections, because most of what we have to work with right now are the characters and a little bit about music and art direction. I want to sort of start from where we begin on this, which is with our narrator, who is Alan Tudyk as Negative Man.
As Mr.
Thank you,
Nobody.
Mr. Nobody.
Important distinction, and
yes.
possibly suddenly realize that it may be confusing for an audience.
With the names being so similar.
Yeah.
But what if they incorporate the Doom Patrol villains, the Nowhere Men?
Oh, geez, even worse.
You have all three in one show.
We're doomed.
Yeah.
So we have this. The show opens with a genre-savvy narrator, which can be really irritating at times as a conceit. I did laugh at some of the genre-savvy narrator's jokes, but I don't know. I think that can often be a cop-out for storytelling. But yeah, that's performed by Alan Tudyk, aka Wash of Firefly. I do think he did a great job, as we've said. But he kind of props up again and sort of narrates things, and I don't know what folks think about him and about the narration.
He gives a good performance. I don't have a problem with his narration, possibly until later. I think the fourth wall breaking has been mostly ruined for me by Deadpool, or Spider-Man with G.I. Joe swords. But I think again, performance saves the material. People's performances in this show save the material, so it's easy to forgive something that coming from a lesser performer. It's good that he chews the scenery. It's good that he's kind of over the top, villainous, that he knows he's the villain and runs with it. it saves something that might otherwise be a little more kind of ham-handed, as I said.
Yeah, I think as much as Alan Tudyk is known to the nerd community like us as Wash from Firefly, I think he's forever going to be underrated as a voice actor. Like, he's remarkable. Yeah. The way he can disguise his voice and utilize it as a tool of his acting, I think, is really extraordinary. And so, even when you don't see his face, whether he's in this or whether he's in Star Wars or what have you, it's just really impressive. So if it was almost anybody else, that dialogue would kind of be unlistenable. But because it's him, I find it rather funny.
Like, I actually laughed at his line about the only people watching this are DC fans.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The only people watching that, what was it again? Grant Morrison fans, angry Redditors, and the 3 people who stayed on after the donkey fart.
Yeah, yes. I laughed at that.
That was okay. That was.
So, speaking of acting, one of the things I thought was interesting about the show is that it feels like it incorporates the meta story of a few of the actors' real lives into subtext of the text in interesting ways. We'll talk about what that means for Larry Traynor in a moment, but I want to kick off with Robot Man. This is the triumphant return of Brendan Fraser, who we recently learned was missing from entertainment industry for a while because he was sexually assaulted. And like, his interview with Variety, or I don't remember where it first was, but he talked.
I read the GQ interview just a couple days before reading this, and it floored me. Like,
it's terrible what he endured, and like when he tried to speak out about him getting like really groped by a powerful person in the industry, the Foreign Press Association's like president at the time sexually assaulted him. Like, people were just like, whatever, this isn't a thing that happens to men. We don't care about what happened to you. Let's just move on from here.
And I know this is a whole other cliff that we could jump off of, but I think, in the wake of the Oscars, Bryan Singer keeps getting to make movies. And so
movies beloved by our nerd tribe, for that matter.
And so the fact that we're willing to, as an entertainment industry, sort of like ignore sexual assaults when the victims are people of color or men or gay men,
young,
like it's
young men,
it's really disgusting. And so I'm glad that Brendan Fraser's back, but because also even separate from that, I think in that same interview he talked about how many injuries he suffered on the Mummy films and how he had to get spinal surgery, and so to go through all this like physical and mental like anguish, like. So it's good to see him be a robot and drive cars now. So.
I mean, but that's the thing, right? So like, he's a robot who drives cars because of the brutality that happened to his body through work. So it's like his personal story of having his body be physically broken and having his consent being removed by sexual assault is mirrored by the story. Like, Robot Man has his brain put into a robot body without his consent. He has his life story being denied and manipulated by a powerful white man who tells him what he experienced and what he didn't, regardless of the truth. And he has like this experience of having to like relearn how to walk and relearn how to inhabit his body. And it mirrors what happened to him in real life. The most direct parallel is when Crazy Jane as Hammerhead first meets him. She grabs his crotch, which is basically what happened to Brendan Fraser in real life. And what's really powerful is later, when she's in a different personality, Crazy Jane apologizes for doing that to him. In most shows where a woman inappropriately touches a man, it's played for laughs and just brushed off as no big deal. But this show shows that it's a violation and it's not okay, and takes it seriously. And I'm sure that Brendan Fraser's personal experience of having been groped informed that decision, and it's a really important thing. And it just is like fucking brilliant. Like,
that's really creepy, Alana.
He could have done all these things. I mean, I know, without having to been suffered for it. I'm not saying he needs to have suffered in those ways to act this, but boy, is it like going raw for him to do this.
Yeah, totally.
And I think it's also really interesting that the show chose to include Cyborg. Like, I know he's not a Doom Patrol member in the comics, but I think his inclusion in here as sort of a mirror image to Robot Man. Yes, clearly. But but I think the fact that, you know, Vic had his own agency taken away from him, but in this case by his father. But I think seeing Cyborg dive into that role as a superhero almost gleefully and sort of take it on as his own sort of personal mission. Like, he has a lot of issues with his dad, clearly, but I think he's been able to adjust to this role as a cyborg much more fully than Robot Man has for a lot of reasons, especially not both mentally and the technology kind of put upon him. But to see Robot Man have to see Cyborg, who's much younger but also much more put together for the world to come, I think is a really interesting choice by the show.
Yeah, and when you were saying that, you have to wonder how much, you know, by the end of the second episode, you do wonder how much of Cyborg's ability to adapt to that role and, like, you know, jumping in with both feet, how much of that is him? How much of it is Vic, and how much of it is Silas? How much of any of this is Vic?
I really think his dad
Vic
is
thinks
abusive.
towards. Oh
yes, clearly
the adult men, you know, the authority figures in this show are extremely abusive, extremely manipulative. Like, whether it's Silas's you know, straight up programming his son, or Niles's you know, almost Munchausen by proxying all three of the big three. You know, I just wanted to protect you. You know, you know, the stuff you were saying about White Diamond the other week in your Steven Universe cast, it's very similar. You know, all I wanted was the best for you, and now you went and screwed it all up, and we have to run from the bigger threat. You know, it's terrible. These guys are terrible.
I mean, one thing I'll give to the script is the Cyborg's line, "You may know who I am, but you don't know shit about me." I was like, I think that is the summary of Cyborg's personality when he's written well.
Yeah.
With his dialogue with his dad. Like, in comics and in the show. Like, I really give them credit for that line.
Yeah. Javon Wade gives me such a Community era Donald Glover vibe. Like, I mean, maybe he's just really at ease and has that goofy smile, you know, the same kind of goofy smile Donald Glover had in when, you know, as playing Troy. It feels really like there's that really welcoming feel to him. He's really good.
I do get that, but I really saw him, especially at the end of the second episode when he's talking to Rita Farr. He's coming into the fold as a leader. Yeah. Because he says to Rita, who's, you know, who we haven't even mentioned so far, is, you know, a former 50s era Hollywood actress who's now sometimes transforms into
a Globe nominee.
That was one of the best lines of the show.
Yes, absolutely.
But when Cyborg tells her, "You were a star today," that was the exact thing she needed to hear in that moment. And whether he believed it or not, he knew those were the words she needed to hear, and so as a leader, he is expertly equipped to deal with these very damaged people because he's
very damaged.
He knows what it is to be damaged. So I really like his performance, especially in that moment.
There are things, you know, I've said ham-handed now 3 times in the show, and there are things that are very ham-handed in this show, but I think there might also be things that are very subtle. And I really want to be able to give them the credit for, like, mirroring certain lines, like you know, the when Rita says we need, you know, has to do the bag scene, and she goes, "We need to set some ground rules," and then that's echoed later on with Larry and the negative spirit. I don't know if that's. The problem is because there's so much other clunky stuff, I don't know if that's deliberate or if these if they just have a limited number of stock phrases that as writers they're capable of or allowed to use. So you just got to keep watching to see if they're any good or not, I guess.
So let's talk about Robot Man a little bit more. The introduction where the narrator is saying, this all starts with like an ass, and he's like, no, not that ass, and he's like, it's not the ass of his wife, it's like Brandon Fraser's ass, and there's this weird dialogue between him and the nanny he's fucking, where he's like saying, who's the fox?
Who's the fox?
And she's
Who's
like,
the
you
fox?
are. And then in the racing scene, they're playing Fox on the Run by Sweet, which is such a good song that I love.
See, I saw in your notes that you caught that. I did not catch that at all. That's your genre. That's
yeah.
I'm gonna have one of those for you later, though.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh gosh. So it's interesting. Like, he's the fox who's on the run. He's like running from his life as it existed, and he's like, it was an interesting, because like that's not is not a thing you shout during sex generally in my in my experience and personal observations of cinema as well. So it's a very stylized choice, and I did laugh at the joke in that. I appreciate the fact that he really does care about his daughter, and that the problem is with his relationship with his wife. But then he's a complete piece of shit and an asshole, and he's struggling with that, and but the whole theme of like him trying to demand his bodily integrity in his relationship between him and the chief, and the way like your body being used without your consent is such and losing control over it is such a thing. I mean, I think
it's a repeated theme in the show, and across the characters. They have all lost across all the characters and the chief. They have all in some sense lost control of their bodies, lost the integrity and what we consider human form.
One of the things the one good thing about Doom Patrol and Titans was listening to Robot Man asking Raven to describe her experience of eating the food that they have at dinner.
That was an excellent scene.
Yes.
The intimate
the Doom Patrol
detail
scenes in that episode are worth going to watch. Like, worth watching.
Because that scene
for.
definitely made me think of the comics, because there is a big through line of Robot Man trying to feel again in the Grant Morrison run, and going to great lengths, sometimes to the detriment of the Doom Patrol, to discover ways that he can actually feel and experience emotions the way he did as a human. So I'm glad that the writers at least have that in mind going forward.
Let's talk about Larry, because Larry Traynor, because I have a feeling that we're going to have the most to say about Larry of any of the characters.
Well,
I think there's a fair assumption there. I love Larry Traynor in the Doom Patrol Young Animal comic. I feel like we're probably all hoping that at some point the story acknowledges like Rebus as a thing in the story, that Larry. I don't know. Let's start by talking about Larry Traynor. So, like the establishing shots of him as sort of this like, as he's this test pilot, and he's performing his masculinity traditionally with his family, and then this horrific thing happens to him. And this is the first time I'd made this connection before, but like Larry Traynor is Hal Jordan as horror.
Yeah. All these characters from like this, all these Silver Age characters who are like test pilots and race car drivers and like manly adventurers, and they all there's astronauts and astronauts in the Fantastic Four, and again bodily integrity being violated, but that's probably a whole nother podcast. But it's totally Hal Jordan, and as horror, and I think in the comics, in the DCU as a whole, I'm pretty sure that's probably been acknowledged at one point or another. That may have Keith Giffen, who's an unsung master historian of DC Comics,
Here.
did a run of Doom Patrol in the mid-2000s that I swear touched on that. Like, it was around the New 52 era. when he and Morrison were doing their magic with like the great unified field of the DCU, and I feel like that must have been acknowledged somewhere that like they knew each other at some point. But it is weird. It's weird to me to see that 1950s like hero archetype used and to put it in the 1950s in the show, and that time span, like that was something that bothered me. I had talked about continuity errors earlier. I had trouble reconciling that, and it really threw me out of it. That was one of the things that threw me out of the show.
Just to be clear, it's early 60s.
Early 60s.
Sorry.
So like,
okay.
so a 50 to 55 year time span. But Rita as well, was Rita in the 50s or the 60s?
Rita's in the 50s.
Rita's in the 50s. So yeah, across the three of them, it's several decades. And, and when Jane said something, when Cliff asks Jane, how long have you been here, or how long have you been busting the Chief's balls? Longer than you've been here. He's been here since 1998, and you're like 12. What's... Yeah, that's...
She says it's been since the 70s. So each one of them comes from a different decade. Like Rita's from the 50s,
yes.
Larry's from the 60s, Jane is from the 70s,
No,
Robot
Jane's
Man's
from the 90s.
80s. No, I thought she said the 70s.
Did she say from the 70s?
I think she said from the 70s, even though the character's from the 90s, and she looks very 90s. I'm pretty sure she said from the 70s,
This is
Robot
one of those
Man
things
from
that
the 80s.
that really threw me on that pilot episode, and like really, it is one of the signs of having been through development hell for a script having been around for a really long time. Sorry.
I think so. As great as the scene was, where Larry taped the note to the mirror that says we need to set some ground rules to communicate with the negative entity, we're in year 50 something of him having sharing a body with an alien being, and this is the first time he's setting ground rules. Like what?
The first time he's really trying to communicate with it.
Yeah, it seems like that should have happened, by like week 2.
For that matter,
you'd hope, but it's about being closeted.
It's been 50 years. Has the Chief really shielded him and Rita from reality that long that he doesn't know it's okay to be gay in public?
Possibly, because the Chief is abusive as hell.
Yeah, like I hope that's a thing that gets addressed later, but I don't have the confidence that it will be. But hope springs eternal.
So Larry Traynor is closeted, much like he's been hiding his physical form, hiding his powers, and hiding himself away for literally decades. In the comics, Larry Traynor, with the beginning of the Grant Morrison run, becomes an entity called Rebus, which is, as they say, an alchemical as an marriage of male and female. Alchemy being like the process in which base substances are transformed to produce gold in the fictional science of our past. And, I was like, I'm hoping that at some point we do get to see Rebus, because what a fascinating non-binary character we could have. And then I'm like, yeah, but they cast Matt Bomer, who is absolutely not trans in any way, but we have a long-standing history of Matt Bomer, who is a gay actor, getting cast as trans characters in real life. So that's the meta story about Matt there.
So as a non-binary person, I value the character of Rebus a lot. Rebus was actually pretty instrumental for me in my journey, in my gender journey, and like I am torn between hoping we see Rebus on screen, that Negative Man becomes Rebus at some point, that we see the alchemical marriage, and not wanting the integrity of the character that they are working on creating violated, because they obviously want to do something with Larry Traynor as closeted gay test pilot hero from the 50s. And let's face it, unfortunately, without being a closeted gay test pilot hero from the 50s, there is not a whole lot to Negative Man or Larry Traynor. historically speaking. Like, he didn't get weird. Like, they restored him to being Larry after being Rebus, chronologically speaking, and he did not get weird until after Rebus. So, like, we'll see where I reserve judgment. We'll see where they go with it. I don't think, I don't want to think that, like, this crew thinks that making the character gay is the equivalent of making them non-binary or intersex. But again, I'm not sure this particular creative team doesn't think that, or has the capacity to not think that, has the capacity to think that complexly. So we'll see. But yeah, it's a different character from what they're showing.
Regardless, Rebus is a character in the comics who's black and white, right?
Yeah.
Rebus encompasses both
a marriage of multiple opposites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's pretend that Rebus doesn't happen in the show, because the show
Rebus
is like, I don't
understand
things that aren't binary gender.
Yeah.
But it's still, I loved in, like, the show the whole idea that it's the negative spirit, like the bad feeling that powers this character, is really amazing. I mean, the image, whether it's in the comics or the show, the image of this fantastic being coming out of the bizarre body, and the physical form just sort of collapses on the ground. And I've always looked at the physical form collapsed on the ground as being like, this is the most vulnerable thing ever. Who would be okay with there being this inert body on the ground in the middle of a superhero fight? That just seems horribly vulnerable, but it's the only way that the negative spirit can get anything done. And it's sort of like being like, your vulnerability has to just be out there in order to be able to do these powerful things.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that is a powerful image, and a good point.
And I think spirit.
I'm sorry, but I just think that it's an interesting kind of correlate to who Larry Traynor is now as a person, because he's somebody who has to keep himself basically mummified every moment of his life because of his horrific burns and scars. So he's vulnerable physically, 24/7, and so then he just kind of has to jump into a superhero fight and trust this negative spirit is going to, slay all comers, or else he'll, be kind of eviscerated by whatever donkey farts in his way.
I loved about the Doom Patrol, Gerard Way, Nick Darrington, like the whole thing with the saying, like, you've got to get into the negative spirit. There's just something, I think, about embracing your own difficulties and, like, saying that maybe it's okay to be depressed and disassociating. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like the whole, like, concept of getting into the negative spirit of things is, like, just an amazing turn of phrase.
I definitely see where you're coming from with that, because, like, there are times when you have to not worry about the reason for why you're feeling a certain way, why you're feeling that bad, because sometimes there is no reason. There's no logical reason for it. You just have to grab it and ride it through and let it happen. Let that happen and feel that feeling and feel, because it's valid. You have to admit its validity and not just, get up and rub some dirt on it and keep going, Too bad you feel bad, gotta go to work.
Like, in the comics, that being the negative spirit is something that's told to him externally, but in the TV show, the spirit itself doesn't call itself the negative spirit.
Yeah.
Larry or somebody is telling Larry that it's the negative spirit. So the negative is his view of himself.
Some Niles is calling it. Yeah.
Is it the negative spirit because it's his negative view of himself as an uncontrollable queer desire? Who named it the negative spirit?
Right. Which Niles Calder in his life named it the negative spirit?
Which negative influence in his life?
Yeah.
I think the emergence of your true self from within, even if you hold that as negative, I think it definitely has a parallel between, Larry Traynor, Rita Farr, and even Crazy Jane, because in the second episode we do get into the underground, where all the negatives of her exist in this kind of like horrifying labyrinth. So there are these layers to the characters that have room to explore, so we just kind of have to see if the show chooses to exploit those to their fullest extent.
One thing character note I liked that I think is from the show exclusively is Larry's orchid hobby. People perceive raising orchids as being really challenging, and there are some kinds of orchids that are can only be raised in a hothouse. It's very hard to do. But there's a lot of orchids that you can just grow in your living room. So you have these flowers that are perceived as being rare and challenging that can only be grown indoors and in private, and that's not really accurate. So he's hiding himself, and he has this very precious hobby that can only be done indoors and closeted, and that's not really true about orchids.
And then Jane comes along, rips everything out of his bus and just leaves it by the side of the road, I guess.
Yeah.
That is from Rebus, by the way. I am 99% sure that the orchids are from Rebus.
Let's talk about the final scene that we have with Larry, where he is returning from this expedition they've had, this brief foray into being out in the world and heroing, and the Lazarus, which is the pivotal song really from Bowie's last album Black Star, is playing as he unwraps his face, and one of the lyrics from Lazarus is, "I'll be free, ain't that just like me?" And in the song and the reality, Bowie is talking about physically dying and his spirit becoming free of his body. And Larry has experienced this physical death himself, and he's unwrapping where he and in Lazarus, Bowie's face is wrapped in bandages as well. So this image of unwrapping in the video, in the music video for Lazarus, which everybody should go and watch right away.
I've seen that frame. I've seen a capture of it, and I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, the unwrapping and the bandages. It's just this perfect thing. Want to weigh in on?
Yeah, that was something that as soon as those lyrics came on, and as soon as I heard that music, I had an involuntary reaction in my brain that was just, oh, this is perfect right here. So anything the show does that might offend me or make me roll my eyes, it does have this perfect moment, because I have a real at least in my own brain, I feel I feel a profound connection to
John.
Yeah, in my heart and soul, I feel a profound connection to David Bowie's music, and so that Black Star album meant a lot to me for obviously because he died, but also for the kind of profound sadness in it and in the music, and so for the show to really utilize that song as this man/alien being is revealing himself to himself and to the audience, I found it really powerful, and so all the credit to that show for picking.
Yeah, when you have it, when your show has earned the right to use Bowie, to me that's a high thing, because people, I felt like the show deserved it in that moment. That
was an excellently done scene, and I told you about this, Alana, but funny story. So I'm watching that scene, and I have yet to listen to Black Star or watch a video or anything, and I heard that music start, and in the captions it says something like art rock plays, and and so I'm listening to it, and then the vocals come in. I'm like, man, somebody's doing a really good Bowie impression here. This is really something. I wonder who, I wonder what this is. And then I go to your show note. You sent the show notes over, and I'm looking at it. It's like, oh wait, that was David Bowie. Oh my God, there is now one less David Bowie song I get to hear for the first time, and and I broke into tears right there. It was just this. It was so sad and so perfect for that scene, like you all were saying, and it was just it was an odd moment in this life, and but yeah, it's a really well done scene, and that is a perfect song for it. So going to this show is done with like a music video director's eye and ear, and it should probably surprise nobody that Clint Mansell of The Fountain, who did the soundtracks for the scores for The Fountain and for Requiem for a Dream, and was in Pop Will Eat Its seminal industrial act Pop Will Eat Itself, is the music director or music co-director of this show, and of Titans as well, but and it's really something else, and I think that really he is such a masterful composer and music director, and it really adds something to the show that I don't know if anybody else could, like the way that the theme has this sort of the same sort of orchestral and guitar and choral vocals thing that every supernatural action show from 1990, from The Crow onwards, has had for the past 20 odd years. And then the closing theme is an 80s synths horror echo of it. If you go back and listen to those two, I mean, it's the exact same. It's the exact same piece, but with these driving 80s Jason's gonna stab you synths. So like the music choices, like you were saying, the sweet track, and there's that scene where Jane is driving the bus into town with the other three, and Total Colo. I don't know how to pronounce this, but the track being used while the bus goes to town is "I Eat Cannibals" by Total Coelho. I don't know if you've ever heard that one, but it's a good track for Jane. It's just sort of weird. It's this weird Oingo Boingo-esque off the wall track, and the music choices are masterful in the show. I can't complain. Can't complain about that for sure.
So let's finish talking about Crazy Jane a little bit, and then we'll go on Rita.
Yeah.
Go ahead. It seems like a lot of folks have a lot of Crazy Jane thoughts and feelings.
I think I got a lot of my Crazy Jane stuff out earlier. This is one of those things that she's going to be a tough topic. She's going to be really hard to do well in the long, over the course of the series, because she is based. Morrison created her for his run, and she's based on the Trudy Chase case from known from the book When Rabbit Howls, and this is a woman who was sexually abused from the age of 3 onwards, and her personality fragmented, she repeatedly, and there famously the other was never debunked. She died in 2010. And her the Sybil, Three Faces of Sybil was eventually debunked. Like, the Sybil in question confessed to having made it all up, but Trudy Chase was the real deal. And that's something I don't know if this team is going to be able to do that well, to deal with that violation and that trauma and that story, and do it in a sensitive way, because when Morrison approached this character, had a better way of dealing with this character, of portraying this character, than the writers on this show do 20 odd years later, that doesn't give me great hope. Or 30 years later, actually, that doesn't give me great hope for the future. But I think they're going to deal with the underground sooner than later. So we'll see very soon.
There was at least the line, I think it was from Robot Man, what does it take for a girl to break herself into so many pieces? Or something like that. So the show is acknowledging that this person has
Absolutely.
suffered probably more trauma than any of the other characters, and why. And we should not hate her. We need to be her friend and help her. So I'm hoping that for the show.
And
From a design standpoint, the whole thing with like her sort of space around her rippling every time she changes personas is a good way to make sure that the audience like doesn't miss that this is happening.
Yeah. There are no visual. There would be no visual cues otherwise, because other than the transformations for some of her personalities.
The one where the metal words shoot out of her
that was
mouth
great.
in graffiti shapes.
That was pretty
and like
cool.
punch the wall. I don't remember that character's name, but that was so fucking cool. That was like the coolest
Silver
superpower thing. Silver Tongue?
Silver
Jesus.
Tongue or something like that. Yeah, that was a really well done. That was a really good design element. And I actually think she may be new for the show. I would have to go back and reread every single panel of the book, twist my arm. But
that was something that definitely surprised me, because that was a power that I was not expecting to see, because I did not see it in the comics.
Yeah, I don't remember it from the book at all. But the other thing that came up, there are an increasing number of people out there on the internet who identify as systems, who are functional adult beings who identify as who have DID or have been diagnosed or self-diagnosed with DID. And so I do have to wonder what they think of this representation, because it is not. DID shows up a lot more in fiction than it is diagnosed, for sure. But it is a thing that exists, so I have to wonder what someone who is diagnosed with DID thinks of this. It is certainly, the powers certainly are fantastical, but the different personalities and the way they get along, and that's something that has to shake out over the course of the series. Like, how do these 64 personalities in one body get along with each other? What does someone who actually has to go through that think of this? What is it? Is any representation good representation?
But I did really like, at least to show how difficult it would be to live like this person, is when Robot Man makes her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He's trying to process.
12 of us are allergic.
Yeah, 12 of us are allergic to peanut butter, and 2 of us have a gluten intolerance. And yet Robot Man is trying to use her as a cipher for his own daughter. But it is a sweet moment where he's trying to help her, and you get to see how difficult it would be if one of the dominant personalities Jane is expressing at that moment is a very angry one.
Yeah,
she can't even eat, because her dietary needs are different for every personality. So she could starve to death if she's not taken care of properly.
Yeah. I mean, there is that was a good scene. The thing with Cliff and Jane and the dad feels of this, there's going to be a lot of dad feels in this show. Between Cliff and Jane,
where would superheroes be if we had no daddy issues?
Well, there is something that not bothers me, but dad feels are the new romance, as daddy-daughter feels are the new romance as writers in Hollywood and in media get older. Because I think it was Lee Alexander, I don't know if y'all are familiar with her, but she was a video game writer for a while, and now she's just a culture writer. But she pointed out at one point that, like, you're starting to see, instead of in video games over the past 10 years or so, you've started to see more of the cute daughter that needs to be rescued rather than the hot girl who needs to be rescued, because these boys are growing up and getting married and having children, and some of them are some of them have to be daughters. It's statistics. And so that's how they're sort of like, that's a gender thing, and I don't know, like, I don't know quite where to go with that, but it's weird the way daughters are sort of held up as a grail, the way the woman you want to marry or at least have sex with was held up as a grail previously is strange. The way dad feels are expressed in these shows is strange, and in this show especially, Cliff isn't the only one who's a parent. You do have Larry with two sons, a man with two sons in the 50s, and he's showing no residual dad feels whatsoever so far. What's going on with that? Why is that? Is that a failure? Is that just something we haven't seen yet, or is that a failure in the writing? I mean, when I talked about this with my housemate, they were like, oh, people in the 50s didn't care about their kids, which I think is highly funny, possibly partially true, but highly reductive.
Yeah.
So I think just sort of like, you're really like, I need to see more of Larry's background.
Yeah, I think if I can offer a pop culture psychology theory,
hit me.
The generation that is writing fiction now is a generation that grew up watching The Simpsons, and that is a show who engineered like half its episodes on the fact that this girl is the heart and soul of the family, and through her is the redemption of this gruff, crass man-child.
Do it for her.
Yeah. So I think that if any one of these writers is like me, you spent countless hours watching The Simpsons and seeing that narrative pay off over and over again, and it has maybe consciously, subconsciously wormed its way into your creative process. It would be interesting to see for Larry Traynor's future development if maybe his sons died and the chief kept that a secret.
Yeah, how he feels about that family he left behind, period. Not just the lover that he couldn't be with, but the rest. What if Larry, here's one. Why can't Larry be bisexual?
Well,
why can't
because we know nobody is bisexual.
There's no such
in
bisexuals. There's no such thing as
especially not men. Never happens.
Yeah,
not even Freddie Mercury can be bisexual.
Oh
no,
yeah,
definitely
no, we can't
not.
bring bisexual, such phantoms as bisexual men into this, complex, realistic world of jet-powered apes and time travel. So,
but I do think there is room.
Sorry. No, there's.
I do think that. I think there is room in that for Larry Traynor, because he's somebody who, even with the narration from Mr. Nobody, says he was running from both his wife and his lover, and so he was equally broken up by that fleeing from both of them. So there is room to show him having love for both of them, even in retrospect.
Let's talk about Rita Farr. So Rita Farr is a character who I mostly know from appearances in Silver Age stuff, appearances in other media like the Young Justice and cartoons and stuff, and a little bit of Doom Patrol when it crossed over, modern Doom Patrol when it crosses over with other shows I've liked. In my past readings of Rita Farr, I have not seen her dealt with as body horror that much, generally because when I've seen her elastic powers are mostly stretchy, and she sort of returns to her normal form, and there are people out in the world who might regard her as horrific, but she doesn't seem to find herself as such. In this show, the leading thing with Rita is that she is experiencing the horror of having an unruly female body.
Yep.
Her body wants to eat. Her body demands she eats all the food. She is self-conscious about it. Her body becomes a literal blob. And, her shame at having to eat, she looks really embarrassed in the Doom Patrol appearance in Teen Titans, where she says, "I'm famished." And she sort of delicately covers her mouth while she's eating. And one way to look at this is that this is a Hollywood actress's fear of being fat. That what's horrific to her is being bigger. And that's pretty realistic of the way a lot of women are raised to think about themselves, and the fat hatred that is really permeates our society and that we need to fight because it's bullshit. And it's this contrast because there's this, not only is her body when she's not when she's not expressing her powers, her body is very pointy and bony, and there's a sharpness to her physicality and to her personality in the show. Like, she is a bitch. And she's a bitch prior to getting her powers. And so I feel like in some ways the show presents her getting her powers as being like something she deserved, like karma. She's getting her just desserts. She's an asshole, so she deserves to have her pristine, hyper-feminine body made unruly by powers beyond her control. And that's kind of fucked up. But it is a really glorious contrast to see. In her opening introduction, she is on a movie set in Africa, where it's just called something about the Congo, though it doesn't mean it was shot there.
Forbidden
and she's
Congo.
complaining, Forbidden Congo.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And she's shown complaining about having to look at a focus puller who's working on the movie, who is black and it doesn't have one of his arms. And she's complaining about how distracting it is to see him there. One point I was thinking as an aside was, I wonder if there's any black focus pullers who are employed on the production of Doom Patrol, because I'm going to guess not. Camera crews are disturbingly white and disturbingly male. But anyway, so she's complaining about this, and then everybody else on the film set is sort of recoiling from her. I don't know if anybody else was worried that maybe the show was implying that what happens to her was a result of, like, African magic or something like that, or if folks, I don't know.
I thought it was her, whatever happened to her was enacted by the African crew. I don't know if it was African voodoo or whatever the show was implying, but I thought somebody on the crew did something to infect her with whatever makes her Elastigirl.
So it's not made clear in the show. I don't feel visually it's made clear what happened to her at all. Like, it could be interpreted as, ooh, voodoo curse, or it could, like, something. On the second viewing, it's a lot clearer. She inhales something while underwater. Something goes into her mouth while underwater. Is it a spirit? Is it a gas bubble? It's really not made clear. Nobody's behavior after the accident, when she's melting, or after the event, I should say, when she's melting, nobody looks at her like, yeah, you got yours now. Like, everybody's horrified by the effects. So, like, I very much see where you're coming from. And so I went back this morning and I read the issue of My Greatest Adventure where the Doom Patrol origins are shown. And it's not a voodoo curse in the comic. She, like, has a very similar accident to the one in the show, and she falls down a waterfall and inhales some sort of strange gas. And a, quote, native witch doctor identifies what happened to her.
Right.
But it's not a result of her character. It's not a result. It's just a thing that happened to a beautiful starlet. And in the comics, her powers are basically the incredible growing and shrinking woman. Like, I don't know if the Elastigirl stuff, like the stretchy stuff, comes till later. But in that first episode, in that first story, it's just she gets big, she gets small. And I would like to take this opportunity to talk about how these characters are EC Comics characters, EC Comics horror stories brought into the DC universe. The Robot Man, his brain survives inside a robot. The incredible shrinking woman, shrinking and growing woman. The possessed burn victim. These stories are all very have the potential to be moralist in that EC Comics way, and I think they took that opportunity. They didn't do it with Larry, and they didn't do it. Well, I guess they kind of did.
With Robot Man, yeah.
Yeah, with Cliff, he got what he deserved for being a jerk. With Larry, he got what he deserved for being a hypocrite, as Mr. Nobody says in the second episode. And Rita got what she deserved for being a bitch. This is the EC Comics mode, not the DC Comics mode that they've decided to run with.
I think Rita exemplifies that most symmetrically, because she's the one who is revolted by the physical damaged body of, an employee of the movie studio, and as a result, her body is then the result of the object of revulsion for herself and everybody around her. So I think it's a much more direct cosmic comeuppance for her.
Yeah, but each of them sort of gets their karmic reward.
Yeah, I love the line, if I could run from me right now, I would, that she says in the show.
Yeah, that was a great line, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah.
And the other great piece she has is, I forget who it is, I think it's Cyborg says, I've seen what you can do with your body. And she says, no, you've seen what my body does.
Yeah.
Does to me.
Yeah.
And so he's viewing what she's doing as a power that can be really impressive. And just, to her, it's just a loss of control of herself that is...
Like you said earlier, Cyborg is going to kind of, or like John said earlier, Cyborg is going to kind of take that leader role where, what they all see as their setbacks, as their disabilities, he sees as their power, as their special ability, as the thing that makes them gives them the potential for greatness. And Rita is the first step in that. And like you said, I've seen what you can do with your body, which is kind of filthy.
Oh.
Well, I think the collision of Cyborg and the Doom Patrol is interesting because at a couple moments in the second episode, it's made it clear that Vic, because of his father, has an end goal of joining the Justice League, whereas the Doom Patrol wants to not be noticed. So if there ever is a diametrically opposed purpose for superpowers, it's joining the Justice League and staying underground.
Not being noticed.
Yes. Yeah. In the X-Men, you have these outsiders who are united by the fact that they all got their powers because of genetics, by pure chance, not because of their own actions, and who have a community and a culture that they build around themselves. And the difference with Doom Patrol is that each one of these heroes is an outlier. Each one of these heroes isn't part of can't really join an outside culture or community except for each other. So I think in a lot of ways it's a very different take on the, Jay Edidin, who's like one of my total comics analysis heroes, had said on his show, Jay and Mouse Explain the X-Men, that the X-Men are actually better as a disability rights metaphor than they are as a queer metaphor. Jay being queer, I feel, can make these points certainly. Sure. And so if we're looking at the X-Men as a disability metaphor that actually does succeed a lot of the time, how do we feel about, the Chief is someone who is playing this paternalistic guy who's taking care of a home full of wayward, confused, challenged people who can't survive out there, which sort of mirrors the traditional institutionalized mode of how the world used to handle folks with disabilities that we now know is really fucking bad and harmful. How does this metaphor sit with people?
Well, the Chief's wrong, isn't he?
Yes. One of the themes of the show, and I feel like a little bit less so for the comics, but very much for the show, is you have a team who, the question is, are they a team of heroes? Not just that, are they a team of heroes? Are they a team of victims? Are they a team of people who had different expectations for their bodies than society had for their bodies?
Okay. I think the Chief certainly wants them to feel like they're a team of victims, and that he is their only salvation, and that through him they can find some place in the world, most preferably under his own scalpel. But I think maybe at some point they can become a team of outcast heroes. Certainly not the kind of world-saving superhuman messiahs that the X-Men sometimes are seen as. But but definitely a team of outcasts, I think.
So I am not as deep into X-Men analysis as you are, Alana, or certainly not as deep as Jay Edidin is. I think people talk about the X-Men as family a lot. Like, and maybe that's true of the core team, but like mutants as a whole are a community, not a family. And I think the Doom Patrol, because it's such a small group, works better as a family more, as a family metaphor. And they are less, as they are not a community as such, they are less freaks defending a world that hates and fears them, as they are non-normative people. They're not necessarily superheroes. They're heroes of necessity. But generally, they're just outliers, non-normative people learning how to live and be their best selves in a world that doesn't understand or appreciate outliers. And that's harder in a big superhero universe where, like, I think this was made clear in the Titans episode where it's like, oh, Beast Boy, you cannot leave the house. You have green hair. Yeah, so does my 14-year-old cousin. They can go hang out at the arcade or the roller rink or whatever thing that does not exist anywhere but the DC universe anymore. They're not superheroes in the way we think of they're not a superhero team in the way that we think of them as a superhero team, and when they try to function as a superhero team that way deliberately, they fall down. Like, that's shown right there in the end of the first episode. What are you going to do? Punch the hole? Like,
and I think in that way, they're almost an exact, like, mirror or negative image of the Fantastic Four, who are a family, who only succeed when they come together, as opposed to Doom Patrol, who fail when they come together, and who seek the spotlight and love it and kind of are energized by it, whereas the Doom Patrol keep doing their best to avoid the spotlight.
Things happen to the Doom Patrol. They do not make things happen necessarily, or they don't. Their intent. They don't make things happen intentionally, and that's not a negative, but that's who they are. That they are people trying to make their way in the world. Where the Fantastic Four and the X-Men are people trying to make a world.
I really think the Fantastic Four is an amazing metaphor that I would love to talk about in future coverage.
Oh yeah, that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah,
I really think, but I mean Fantastic Four versus Doom Patrol, especially
versus Doom Patrol for sure.
Especially because in a lot of the DC animated universe, they really lean into the family piece of it, with Rita Farr basically being the foster mother to Beast Boy, and Rita Farr's powers basically being Mr. Fantastic's powers. So I would love to talk about that at a later date. Thank you for bringing that, John.
Yeah.
So,
just one quick thing. I thought when they first enter the donkey's hole, which that was a little much for me. I kind of got the impression that when they saw the stick figure paintings of the citizens of Cloverton, that was a direct reference to the Painted that Ate Paris story from the Grant Morrison run. So that was an Easter egg that I actually really enjoyed.
I hope that all I have to say to wrap it up is I hope that over the course of this discussion, I've shown that I don't hate the Doom Patrol. I just might hate Doom Patrol or dislike Doom Patrol the show. I feel like DC has always had trouble understanding what's really driving their characters and their IP, and I feel like this is consistent with that. And I wish they were, there's so much that can be done with the Doom Patrol, and I really wish they were brave enough to do more with it, especially outside the restrictions of advertising TV, but it looks like they just keep falling. I wish they could do more than just cusses, farts, and a single bare titty.
I mean, they seem very proud of themselves for having cast a gay man as a gay man. Like from the press
good
junket,
job.
they're like so proud of themselves.
Huzzah!
If they can manage to not cast him as a trans woman, then or a trans
Or non-binary,
intersex person, or magical intersex person, then that could be a miracle on par with anything that Scott Free has pulled off. So, ha-cha-cha-cha-cha, and that's the show, folks.
Yes. So thank you for listening to Graphic Policy Radio. You can find me on Twitter all the damn time at ELANA_Brooklyn. Graphicpolicy.com is our website for comics news and reviews. We are on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and actually Brett's been uploading this to YouTube lately, so if you prefer to stream things there, you can do that. Chances are the next episode you'll be hearing from us is our look at Punisher Season 2. And thank you again to our guests. As we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.